Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Triangulation, episode 202, recorded Monday, June 1st, 2015. Stewart Lew, visual effects. Triangulation is brought to you by Braintree. If you're working on a mobile app and searching for a simple payment solution, check out Braintree. With one simple integration, you can offer your customers every way to pay, period. To learn more and for your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free, go to braintreepayments.com/triangulation. And by Personal Capital. With Personal Capital, you get award-winning financial tools, unbiased advice, and a transparent view of all your investments. Best of all, it's free. To sign up, go to personalcapital.com/triangulation. And by Trunk Club. Have the wardrobe you've always dreamed of, handpicked by your own personal stylist. Go to trunkclub.com/twit and join Trunk Club today for free. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get together with some of the most interesting people in technology and get to talk to them and learn. And I love coming in on a Monday and doing this show because it's so much fun. And Stewart Lew is here, I'm really thrilled to say. He's a board member of the Visual Effects Society Bay Area. He has worked on 4 out of the 6 Star Wars movies in visual effects. Many other movies. He is a visual effects expert. It's great to have you, Stewart. I appreciate it.
That's great to be here.
We met, you were here for one of our parties, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Was it like?
It was about a year ago.
A year ago.
Yeah.
And you introduced yourself, and I was thrilled to meet you at the time. Chairman of the Visual Effects Society. Mm-hmm. And we've been talking ever since about, I'd love to do some more stuff with visual effects. So consider this the beginning maybe of something we could do more of. Making the new screensavers, I'd love to. Because what's fun is you see a movie.
Yeah.
And it's great to not know anything about it ahead of time, right? It must be hard for you.
We typically work extensively on a film, not to cut you off, but it could be a year and a half.
So you don't really get the joy of seeing the movie for the first time ever, really?
It is. I mean, well, we do when we see other people's work.
Right.
That's.
But even then, do you start to pick it apart?
I usually have to see a film twice, and I see it once to try to pick it apart the first time, and then the second time just to try to enjoy it as a movie. Or see that I mean, I guess it depends on what hat you're wearing. Are you a filmmaker?
Right.
Are you looking at it technically? Visual effects is a very broad term, and nowadays we have a lot of the effects are based on computer graphics.
That's called CG or CGI.
CGI, right? Computer-generated imagery, are computer graphics.
Right.
A lot of the innovations that we take for granted, even Photoshop, were developed by visual effects practitioners and artists. Right. John No, who is the chief creative officer at Industrial Light and Magic, him and his brother Tom made Photoshop before it was even an Adobe product.
Right.
And we were testing it at ILM as a tool. And it was even presented to George before it was a piece of software that was commercial. And George wasn't really interested in software development, didn't see the value in it.
In fact, the division that he had working on that, he sold off as Pixar.
Yes, it was
maybe a little mistake, but
I don't think it's a mistake. And I mean, I'm going to speak personally, but I would say that Pixar had, I could say one way to think of it is that Pixar originally was a hardware and software company. Animation was a major part of what they did, but they also made a piece of hardware called the Pixar computer that went into medical imaging. Steve Jobs ultimately bought the company from George Lucas in the mid-'80s. And in the beginning, I think even Steve didn't know exactly what Pixar was. He had no idea. He's not an animator. Yeah. He's not a writer. He's not a filmmaker.
And Toy Story was a distant dream. I mean, it wasn't something they were
actually,
doing.
I mean, the thought is that the company would make an animated feature in 5 years, and it took more than 10.
Yeah.
Because if he bought it in the mid-'80s, it was 95. It's now the 20th anniversary of Toy Story. You know, time flies by. That was quite an innovative piece of filmmaking. But yeah, computer graphics was something George looked at as a solution, as a tool to make films.
Episode 4, which confusingly is the first Star
That's
Wars
right.
and A New Hope, one of the most it really grabs you at the beginning because you're watching that little ship, and then the big ship comes in. But those aren't computer graphics.
No, those are miniature models
They're
on
models.
motion control, but they used computers to program the actual camera motion.
Right.
So the models aren't actually moving. You can think of them as models on a stick.
The camera's
It's the camera's moving. And that was computer controlled. And ILM is now celebrating its 40th anniversary.
Wow.
I think it's only 1 year older than Apple.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Apple started in 76,
Yeah.
and ILM started in 75.
75.
And it specifically was created to do effects for Star Wars.
Which came out in 77, a couple of
That's
years
right.
later. Yeah.
And it was, it was a gamble for George to do visual effects because he wrote amazing ideas for the film, and he had an amazing visualist named Ralph McQuarrie, who was a concept artist who came from the industrial design side of things, did paintings, space paintings for NASA, and designed many of the things that we take for granted, like C-3PO, R2-D2, Darth Vader, and literally George pitched the movie with concept art to the studios.
Right.
That sold them on it. But it's one thing to paint this amazing painting, and it's quite another thing to create that into actual visual effects shots.
We go back to the earliest days of visual effects, and Ray Harryhausen and King Kong.
That's right.
And they're almost all models or painted plates
Sure.
with mats, that kind of thing. When did people start using computers first in filmmaking?
In terms of filmmaking, I would say that computer graphics really started in the 70s.
Yeah.
Ed Catmull, who was the founder of Pixar, who has a PhD in computer science, was doing things for Westworld. So there was some
Westworld, the Yul Brynner movie.
There was like a digital hand.
He's
that
a
was
robot in it's an amusement park, and it's staffed by robots, including Yul Brynner.
That's right.
And so you see, that scene with his digital hand, that's a computer-generated graphic.
That is a computer-generated graphic.
Interesting.
There was some very minimal amount of computer graphics in the original Star Wars. The trench sequence, there was like a simulation. It was a basic image of that time. It took a lot. I mean, Tron was obviously, I think, the one that really drew most attention.
The original Tron.
The original Tron.
Yeah.
In the 80s, and that was that was an innovative use of computer graphics. The film, people have mixed opinions about the movie at the time.
Right.
But it definitely was a film that drew a lot of attention.
That's often the case, by the way. Is that this is Tron. The movie is second. I mean, it's wonderful to see these special effects.
Yeah.
But it doesn't guarantee a good movie.
But interestingly, this was done through Disney, but Disney didn't do the actual images that you see. They had another company, Digital Pictures, that actually created the computer animation. But John Lasseter, who was working at Disney Animation at the time, was so blown away by the possibilities of what he saw on a film like Tron.
Interesting.
That he actually pitched a film, Where the Wild Things Are, as an animated film with computer backgrounds and hand-drawn animation at Disney.
Jason, can you see my computer? Because I want to show the first 3D animation in the movie. This is Westworld. This is on YouTube, amazingly enough. And we're going to see Yul Brynner's hand. The thing is, computers in 1976. I mean, think about it. 1976. This is before the Apple II came out.
Sure.
So computers were not super sophisticated.
No, they weren't.
And the tools weren't super amazing at this point.
It was very primitive. You had an interesting combination of engineers and artists that worked in this process, but it was probably, I would say, obviously a lot more cumbersome than the tools that we take for granted today.
So just what you're seeing there is the first CGI, but of course it's not good enough to look like it's really real. So they put it in a computer screen.
That's right.
So that you don't say, well, what the? That's not. That's not Yul Brynner's hand.
But I also have to mention a very innovative computer-generated effects sequence was the Genesis project that was shown in The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
In 1982, and that was actually a group of artists that actually worked at Lucasfilm Computer Division that actually became Pixar. So
Interesting. So it's very incestuous, isn't it? It's really a kind of a group of people who, like John Knoll, who know each other, Ed Catmull,
That's right.
and John Lasseter, George Lucas, and it seems like it all was, it's not a surprise you're in San Rafael. It was all fertilized down the highway here.
I mean, a lot of the Bay Area had some,
Not L.A.
Not necessarily LA, but to be fair, also in the 80s, the HBO logos that were done with computer graphics as well. So a lot of motion graphics were used in were using computer graphics. So you had a group of artists in New York of all places that were doing post work, and they were actually heavily using the technology. Some of them actually founded a company known as Blue Sky Studios that has done the Ice Age films.
Those are good.
And one of the artists there and the founding member was also involved in Tron as well. So there was, and I'm kind of going back and forth, but The Last Starfighter also had computer-generated spaceships, no motion blur, so it kind of stood out in terms of film look. But it was an example where you made computer-generated vehicles in the 80s.
If you go back if you go back and look at the graphics, this is an early Super Bowl on television. This isn't that long ago. This is the 70s. It's funny when you go back and look at this stuff how primitive it is. Look at how the reveal. But those are computer generated. They're just not very good.
And there were.
And this is not long, really not long ago.
I mean, Pixar is probably going to be celebrating its 30th anniversary. I think 86 is when they were founded under Steve. But yeah, I mean, it isn't very old, but in some ways, a lot has happened, and the expectations of the public. I think the truth about visual effects is it shouldn't draw attention to itself in anything. If anything, it should be invisible.
That's in one ways why it really was premature in these early versions. And one of the things they did, they wouldn't try to pretend it's reality. I mean, it was far from, here's The Last Star. We'll show the theatrical trailer from The Last Starfighter. And nobody was pretending that this was, well, The Last Starfighter may be, right?
I think they did.
This is a series. This is not the actual. I want to find the movie. Do you have it? There it is. So this is supposed to be real.
Yeah, it's supposed to be real. But when you compare it to Star Wars and films that use miniature models...
Models are so much better.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I do know there's a school of thought in the public where they like practical effects more than computer.
People want to go back to models. In fact, people, I think, were very thrilled to see that J.J. Abrams was going to use a physical, that new robot.
That's right.
Was going to use a physical thing instead of trying to do a CG. It would be easy.
I think he wants to keep the look consistent to what...
The old days.
Jedi. Yeah.
But if you went to a theater and saw this today, you'd go, oh boy, those are cheesy. These are cheesy effects. The key is not to think it's an effect at all.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the things I find fascinating is you're seeing special effects all the time.
Yeah.
And you don't know it.
And it is invisible to some extent. Two movies I'll draw attention to last year were The Birdman and The Grand Budapest Hotel. And they both had visual effects, but
neither of which you think of as action flicks or sci-fi.
That's right. No dinosaurs, no monsters, no spaceships.
Birdman had special effects?
Yes.
All right, we're going to stop and you're going to tell me because that makes me mad. I thought the whole thing was shot in one shot and there's no music, just drums. There's special effects.
Don't
tell me yet. Okay, I'm going to hold on for a second. We're taking a break. Stewart Lew is our guest. He's on the board of the Visual Effects Society Bay Area. He's also a visual effects. Your title in many of these movies is model
supervisor,
or model designer. But that doesn't mean a physical model.
No, it's a digital model.
That's a digital model.
That's right.
All right, I'm going to talk about that. He's a model designer. But first, I want to talk to mobile app developers. I know there's some in the audience today. There's quite a few of you out there who are looking for a way to add payments to your mobile app. And of course, the last thing you want to do is write your own payments module. That's not only time consuming, but it's a recipe for disaster, because we're talking about people's money here. This is serious stuff. You want to go to somebody who's aced this, who's got it, who's secure, who works with every possible payment system, who makes it easy for you to add mobile payments without a lot of heartache. And that's got to be Braintree. Braintree, everybody uses Braintree. Uber and Lyft, Airbnb and hotels tonight. GitHub started with Braintree, and they've scaled to huge with Braintree. And the best thing about Braintree Payments, it takes every form of payment. You want to do Apple Pay? No problem. You want to do PayPal? No problem. Coinbase, you can do Bitcoin. You want to do credit cards? No problem. Currencies, hundreds of different currencies are supported. Just a few lines of code, works with all the major platforms. It's very easy to do. Venmo is supported. It is fabulous. Superior fraud protection, superb customer service, and important to you, fast payouts. This is the payments API the big guys use, but it's affordable, it's easy, it will scale with you from your first dollar to your billionth dollar. I have to put in a strong plug. You've got to check it out. They have a sandbox you can use right now to see what your app would look like with Braintree Payments involved. BraintreePayments.com/triangulation, and as a little bit of a sweetener, a little sugar in your tea, they're going to give you your first $50,000 in transactions fee-free. How's that, huh? $50,000 in transactions fee-free. BraintreePayments.com/triangulation. I always want to say it's a no-brainer, but maybe that wouldn't be appropriate. It's a definite Braintree. BraintreePayments.com/triangulation. Stewart Lew is our guest on Triangulation this week. We're talking visual effects, which is so much fun. Wait a minute. Now, Birdman, Academy Award-winning, wonderful movie.
Yep.
Michael Keaton. It looks, the director intentionally made it look like it was all one shot,
That's
so
right.
it would be cinema verite.
Exactly.
There's no room for special. Oh, wait a minute,
Yes.
though. He does fly.
Yes. You have him fly. You have.
He has to float when he meditates.
There's a creature. There are
No,
things
you're
blowing
right.
up.
Okay.
So
All
I
right.
mean, it's not all in camera.
Yeah.
As much as I love in camera effects, George Miller back in the original Mad Max films, those cars crashing are real
They
cars.
really are crashing.
Yeah. But in his latest film, Mad Max Fury Road, there are 2,000 effect shots. So even there are real cars, there is plenty of compositing of effects. There's
But
plenty of
billowing flame, you're not going to
right.
want to do that with actors involved.
right.
So those things you have to add after the fact.
And there's also, when I say invisible effects, I think like the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah, where's there an effect there?
A lot of there are miniatures, but there's a lot of comping, and it's almost an extension of production design. So there's almost a
Right.
gray zone of where does production design end, and then where does visual effects
Wes
begin.
Anderson is famous for models like
That's right.
the fantastic Mr. Fox. Is it's stop motion.
That's right.
And you can tell it's detail. Here's the Grand Budapest Hotel, and there's before and after.
Yeah.
So yeah, they had to because these are real places, and sometimes real
right.
places don't look as good or have quite the look.
There's a lot
they
of what
need.
we call color correction. There's an artist behind this process, but
Right.
they're creating a look to the film.
Yeah, certainly the film has to feel a little surreal for Wes Anderson. There has to be this kind of super real kind of weirdness.
You brought up
going
a good point about stop motion, because the truth also is the Visual Effects Society is not just simply folks that work in live action film. I mean, that's a general assumption, but we have people who work in stop motion. We have miniature model builders.
Yeah.
We have people who work in gaming. We have folks also even in a number of the tech companies like Google and Apple, Microsoft, that are also VES members, because gaming is also a visual effect.
Are the same techniques used in gaming that are used in film?
I think yes. I mean, I do know that as well because I worked at Electronic Arts and I did work in games. Yes, the answer is yes. There are differences, but in some ways, what is different for sure is the fact that in games, everything you see for the most part is computer generated, much like
Right.
an animated feature film.
Some of it in real time, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to all be in real time, right?
They have what Blizzard does a lot of what we call pre-rendered cinematics, and they are
The cutscenes.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they are like short films. So a lot of the same skills that are used in live-action movies are used in animated films, or they're also used in video games as well. So
What kind of computers were they using in the 70s They sure weren't using Apple IIs.
No.
Or Ataris. Or
I know for Tron they use Crays.
Crays, supercomputers.
Yeah, supercomputers. When I was at Industrial Light and Magic, when we started, and it was just right after Jurassic Park, we were using Silicon Graphics Unix workstations.
Yeah. That's one of the that was one of the threats, and one of the reasons Next was created is to try to create a low-cost SGI workstation. Yeah. They actually weren't able to do it.
And nowadays, everyone is using basically Linux boxes.
Yeah.
So they're running essentially PCs.
With the power of a Cray.
Yeah.
And sometimes many hundreds of them in a render farm.
Exactly.
Giving you, so each computer does a different frame and giving you incredible power if you really think about it.
And a lot of it is also, there's a lot of innovation even in the real-time graphics in games as well. So to be fair, we have software rendering that is using what you just mentioned, a render farm, but also there is a lot that can be done with the GPU. So a lot of prototyping of the imagery could actually be used.
Kind of almost real time.
Yeah, real time,
near
exactly.
real time, yeah.
Because in the old days, we would say it's a coffee break, we have to wait for the renders. And also, to be fair, it depends on the complexity of the image. If you have a lot of simulation particles, if you have a lot of fur, a lot of complex renderings could even take 20 hours a frame. Which is not a problem when you have a powerful render farm, but it is an issue, obviously, if you think about real-time graphics, you want 60 frames per second in a game or console type of platform. You're trying to balance what is possible with the GPU and a lot of the technology that is applied to that.
Yeah. Berkeley Steven in the chat room, who I feel like with his name Berkeley Steven, he's probably worked with Crays, said that the Cray 1 was clocked at 250 megaflops, which would be millions of floating point operations per second, 250 million floating point operations per second. Your i7 running at 2 or 3 gigahertz is in the gigaflops range for sure, and the fastest computers out there probably now are teraflops.
Yep.
So it just means it takes more time.
Well,
although you don't have as much memory either. So.
I have to say something about that. When you say it takes more time, Jurassic Park, which might shock some people, only has 7.5 minutes of computer graphics. But it took a huge team at ILM to put that together. But nowadays we take it for granted.
And probably a year, right?
Yeah, easily years.
Years.
Because there was an R&D process.
For 7 minutes.
For 7 minutes.
On the screen.
But to be fair, to the practical effects, about 7.5 minutes was done with puppets, with the Stan Winston.
Dinosaur puppets.
Dinosaur puppets. So the close-up shots of the T-Rex when the feet are pressing in the mud.
Those are real.
Those are real. But anytime the dinosaur is chasing, running in the kitchen with the raptors, the T-Rex picking up the raptor and throwing it against the skeleton, that's CG.
But to their credit, it's seamless, right? I mean, I don't remember at any point watching this movie going, oh, that just went from model to CG. It's pretty seamless.
And it helped the ILM computer graphics crew, too, to look at the puppet work, to use that as a benchmark to make their models, make their characters render and look like the physical objects. But nowadays, I'm sure with Jurassic World, the vast majority of the shots are entirely computer generated.
Well, I was going to ask you, 7 minutes in the original Jurassic Park, the new Jurassic World, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Probably, like an hour or 2.
It can be. I mean, 50 minutes of CGI is not surprising. To give you an example, I worked on probably the first Star Trek live-action film that used a CG Enterprise. That was Generations, and we did an Enterprise B. But we had a physical miniature.
You had a model of
we had a real
NCC
model,
1701.
and we had a CG model.
Yeah.
So we had shots that were both physical and computer generated.
Was that the one where it's in the space dock and they take it out?
It's the one where there is an anomaly that hits the Enterprise B, and Kirk dies in that film.
No spoilers.
It was a blend of. It was a blend between the Next Generation and the
It must be hard for you working on a film for a year and you know all this stuff. Not
we actually we sit through. I mean, to some degree, it depends. We focus on the shots of the film, but yes, we do read the scripts.
Yeah.
To some degree, and we kind
it's
of
hard. You got to shut up.
You know the film, but you know the final edit changes too as well. So
right. It could be different. Kirk could survive. Kirk could survive. There is a definite group of people who prefers models
Sure.
to CGI. In fact, I just read a review of the new heavily graphics effect movie, San Andreas. And it was in I think A.O. Scott in the New York Times, and he said, these effects are great. I mean, we've seen the Golden Gate Bridge. How many times have we seen the Golden Gate Bridge fall down and get destroyed? The effects are great. He said, but somehow it doesn't seem emotional. Do you feel like, well, I'm asking the wrong guy.
No,
because
you're not,
gonna,
but I mean,
no? How do you?
I'm pretty neutral about it because I do appreciate practical models and I do love computer graphics. I work in the computer graphics side. But when I started at ILM, I was employee 45 in the CG department.
Neat.
It was a small group, but we had a model shop.
Right.
And we worked together. I mean, when
the only thing real in this probably is the helicopter, right? Maybe not even the helicopter.
There are some shots where there's a CG helicopter, and there are shots that are real. It's also.
But the Hollywood sign did not fall down. And to my eye, I can't look at that and say that looks fake. But I don't think A.O. Scott is completely wrong when he says it doesn't. It's like you're looking at it doesn't have the impact that a real event would have because that's CGI.
There's definitely truth to that. There's also an argument with filmmakers too. I think the vast majority of filmmakers have embraced digital. But so to give you mentioned J.J. Abrams.
Yeah.
I love his work, but if you look at the last two Star Trek films, the reboot and the Into Darkness, every ship you see, the Enterprise and all the spaceships are entirely digital. There is no practical models. So the old days in the 80s when we had like Wrath of Khan.
Yeah,
and other films
I
like
like models.
Those are all physical models.
I think I like models.
I point out to you that JJ made a choice.
Yeah.
In those Star Trek films.
Is it an economic choice?
I think some of it is driven by economics. The other argument is the flexibility, that you can't have the flexibility in terms of changing the shots.
Right.
But it's good or bad. I mean, in the old days, the folks that worked on Star Wars would say, we build a model, we paint it to look amazing. We blow it up on a stage using motion control cameras, and we can get it done in one take.
Right.
If you think about the digital process, nothing is done in one take.
There isn't even a take. You can't even talk about a take.
With millions, it could be a shot could be worked on for 3 or 4 months because it's the director could change his mind.
It's basically animation. I mean, right? That's fair to say. It's just. Do you guys use ray tracing at all?
Yes, we use ray tracing. There's a lot of different approaches to rendering.
Yeah.
But ray tracing is definitely the earlier films. I would say not so much
because it's computationally intensive. You can't.
Like the original, looking back at Terminator 2, there was no ray tracing done in those shots. So the reflection maps were used instead of using
kind of more like a video game would work today, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is an economic decision because you just you can't take 4 years to ray trace.
No, you have to have
T1000. You have to.
Yeah, I think with real-time graphics, you're thinking obviously of high frame rates,
right?
And real-time.
Yeah, you don't have much time.
That's right.
Do you use the same kind of techniques, polygons and texture mapping and things like that?
Yes, a lot of the innovation that was done applies to both feature film, television, and I should also point out that games. A lot of the technology that is used in games is technology we use in film.
Right.
So I think some of the differences is that we have the luxury with feature work to have renderings that can take hours, which obviously can't happen in real-time games. So I think you work with a tighter set of constraints if you do things with real-time graphics than you do with feature. But I think that if you look at the innovation that has been happening in real-time graphics, you're seeing amazing image quality that wasn't possible years back. So I'd point out that
that's really true. To the point where a show like Battlestar Galactica, which had to produce a show every week and doesn't have years, yet they had really a pretty good CGI, and they were doing great things like snap turns and focusing and stuff and lens flares that made it feel very real.
Sure.
And so I think we've also learned a little bit about, because the early CGI was maybe too clean, too perfect, too precise.
That's right.
We've learned a little bit about how to trick humans into feeling like It's real.
It's real. I think what makes Star Wars work, even the original films, I think, is that nothing was clean. The ships
they're distressed.
They're distressed.
Yeah.
Tatooine, even the set looks like it's a lived-in place.
Yeah.
So
That's got to be George. Credit
that
to
is
George.
George.
On that. Yeah.
But I also would point out, when you talk about this argument between practical versus CG, a lot of it has to do with the filmmaker making those key choices.
It's an aesthetic.
I think it's aesthetic, and I'm going to specifically reference Christopher Nolan. He likes to have practical models.
If you had asked me, I would have said that. Yeah.
Nolan is one of the filmmakers.
Yeah. So Interstellar, obviously some special effects.
Yeah.
But because you can't make a tesseract in the real world yet. But you're saying a lot of that was practical.
The ships were entirely physical miniatures.
They were miniatures and sets.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I mean, there was a lot of compositing and there was a lot of computer graphics, but Nolan has this sense that he wants things real. I mean, that was back in the Dark Knight film as well.
I think that worked, to be honest. In fact, some of this footage is actual NASA footage of rockets and so forth to make it feel like something's really going on. I think that works. I'm a fan.
So I mean, Nolan also, but to be fair to Nolan, he is an exception in the industry because he insists on shooting in film. He will not shoot digital. He will not
uses film.
He uses film. I met Nolan at Skywalker Sound when he presented the last Dark Knight film, and he was very specific. Like literally, he didn't agree with George Lucas. George more than 10 years ago, I think back in 2001.
Went digital. Yeah,
went all digital during Attack of the Clones and said film is dead.
Yeah.
So Nolan is a contrarian in that respect. He's obviously younger than George Lucas, but
Isn't that funny?
He's making a choice. But here's another point I have to make, and I'm not trashing digital by any means.
No, it's your business. You better not.
But J.J. Abrams is shooting this new Star Wars film, Episode 7, in film. His cinematographer prefers film, and he is not doing this, I think, because of a contrarian approach. It's just that he doesn't like his Star Trek films were shot in film.
Yeah.
He prefers.
Does it look different?
There is a texture, there's a grain to film, and it can exist in digital, but it's an approach. And I don't want to say it's always bad, because the last James Bond film, Skyfall, was shot entirely in digital, and it looks beautiful. I mean, I don't think the film.
It is funny though. This is almost like going to the analog versus digital argument over music.
Sure.
Where you can't pinpoint an actual scientifically measurable difference, but there's an emotional difference that maybe I'm imagining it. But the films that you mentioned that were shot on film, I know I like better than the films
that are shot digitally.
And I didn't know which is which. But I can tell you, I mean, Interstellar to me, I think when I saw Interstellar, I compared it to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was obviously all practicals, all film, all plates. I mean, they didn't have anything. No they couldn't do. There were computer screens, but there were actual computer screens.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Douglas Trumbo was the visual effects supervisor, designer.
Brilliant guy.
Amazing guy, did Close Encounters as well. And my first job out of art school, I went to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, was to work at Doug Trumbo's company, but it was under Richard Edlund. It was called Boss Films.
Wow.
But it was the same place that Blade Runner was shot in.
Wow.
Close Encounters.
Blade Runner mostly.
It's all practical, all in camera. All in camera. Except I think the more recent cuts that were done, there were a little bit of CG that was added, but really, really minor.
I want to talk to you about that because, of course, there's a great controversy over what George has done to Episode 4. And there's a movement to bring it back to the original. I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk about Uncanny Valley, too. Stewart Lew is our guest. He is on the board of the Visual Effects Society of the Bay Area. He is a visual effects, a digital model guy, supervisor on many films you've seen. And he's worked on 6 of the Star Wars movies.
4 of the 6.
4 of the 6. You couldn't have worked on all 6. You're too young. He's worked on 4 of the 6 Star Wars movies. Lots more to come with our conversation. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Personal Capital, our great sponsor. Personal Capital has been making Triangulation available for years now. And it all kind of started when I interviewed their chairman, Bill Harris, the founder of Personal Capital, on Triangulation. And I didn't even know at the time what he was up to. We were talking to Bill, and we've talked to him again since because he was the founder of PayPal with Elon Musk. He was a the founder, or rather CEO of Intuit. This guy is a brilliant guy. And he mentioned at the end of the interview a few years ago, oh, yeah, and I'm doing this new thing. I got a new startup. It's called Personal Capital. You should check it out. I wanted to say then, hey, please, would you like to advertise on Triangulation? I didn't, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, because then he came along later. I should explain what Personal Capital is. Personal Capital is brilliant. It is, in a way, this is a gift from Bill Harris to you. It's a free service that allows you to see where your money is and how it's working for you. You know, we all have to plan for our future, for our retirements especially. I hope you're putting money away for that. And the problem is that we're busy. Who has time to pay attention to what's happening with our investments? Or, and this would be worse, you go to a broker dealer who does not have your best interests at heart. The broker dealer is basically a salesperson on commission. So their interest is in putting you in high commission trades, trade more often. That's not what you want. What you want is a registered financial advisor who has a fiduciary responsibility to look out for your best interests and is not working on commission. That's what Personal Capital offers. Now, that part is not free, but I got to tell you, you don't have to do that part. So this is one of those systems that's freemium. You go to personalcapital.com, you put in your accounts, you'll get this dashboard. You can look at it on your desktop, on your phone, on your tablet. They support Android Wear and now the new Apple Watch too. So I get notifications, for instance, one of your investments is underperforming. You might want to check this out. It's great. It's great. This is all free. And if you put in $100,000 or more in the dashboard in assets, and probably that's not so hard to do for many of you if you've been saving for a little while, you get a free 30-minute review with one of their financial advisors. They're very good. This is a team that works out of Denver, Colorado, and they're some of the best people out there. You can, and this is free, you know, and they're not trying to sell you anything. They'll talk about your financial goals, your risk tolerance, your time horizon. They'll help you with your retirement planning. For 30 minutes, that is a tune-up you must take advantage of. You can also invest with them, but you don't have to. Personalcapital.com. It's free. It's absolutely secure. You can take my word for it. And you're going to love it. I've been using it ever since I met Bill, and I'm really thrilled with it. That's why they've got $150 billion in personal finances now. People are tracking with them. Take advantage of that free 30-minute checkup when you put $100,000 or more in assets in the dashboard. But you don't have to. Personalcapital.com/triangulation. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your future. Your future self, your 65-year-old self will thank you. We'll look back and say, boy, I'm glad I did that back in 2015. Whew. We're talking about one of my favorite subjects. I love movies. I mean, who doesn't love movies, right?
It's hard not to. I'm a huge film buff, and I've always been that way. But I have to point out, and I'm not trying to be anal about it, but I have to say the term visual effects and special effects are actually two different words. But there's no special effects are typically what we think of as in camera, so pyrotechnics.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So what we shoot in camera. And typically what we see as visual effects is the post-production process.
Right.
So a lot of the computer-generated effects.
Stuff. Yeah.
But a lot of in-camera stuff is what we would call special effects. And nowadays, a lot of the post work that's done, when we talk about 1,000 shots in this film, done by a facility like ILM or other companies,
or Weta,
that's visual effects.
Right.
So, but
most movies these days have both, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think of The Hobbit. We're talking about Weta and The Lord of the Rings. The Gandalf is tall not because of some computer, but because of camera work.
Sure. And also, they have at Weta they have both a Weta workshop and a Weta digital unit. The workshop builds props. They build swords and armor.
Right.
And they build miniatures. Unfortunately, the Hobbit films had no miniature work.
Really?
It was entirely digital. Because of the fact that Peter wanted high frame rate and he wanted digital.
Oh, that's right.
He wanted 3D. And he felt he could not have that control of the 3D with the miniatures. So the original 3 Lord of the Rings films had miniatures, and Weta's own term was bigatures. They were bigger than the studio.
Yeah,
they were large,
giant
very
stages.
Huge sets that were created for those films.
With green on parts of them so they can mat in additional armies of orcs or whatever they need. But yeah, it's amazing to see those giant soundstage sets that they're working on.
And Peter's a huge lover of film himself. I mean, King Kong, the original King Kong, inspired him to make movies.
Oh, really?
And he actually
Was that Ray Harryhausen, the original King Kong? Yeah.
No, that was Willis O'Brien.
Willis O'Brien.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I mean, that's 1938 or 39.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there was matte paintings that were done on glass. There was a lot.
Do people still do those things?
Not now, I would
Not
say.
so much.
Not so much. I mean, we still have model builders that build miniatures to some extent, but I'll be honest. There is a lot more digital work than there is practical work.
The Hobbit is an interesting example. I read some reviews of The Hobbit because Peter is shooting this in high frame rate, and he's shooting it in very high resolution. The practicals sometimes don't look very real. Somebody said Gandalf's staff looked like he bought it at Staffs R Us. It was made out of rosin. You have to go, I mean, makeup.
Sure. A whole nother level.
Everything has to be much more realistic than it used to be.
Sure. And I saw recently Brad Bird's latest film, Tomorrowland, and that was projected in 4K at the venue that I took a look at.
We're seeing so much more detail now.
We're seeing a lot more detail. He's choosing to shoot that film in digital. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I think makeup, but that also happened in broadcast years back when they moved from standard definition to HD.
Yeah.
That the makeup work had to be upgraded to make up for the higher resolution of HD.
On Tech TV, which was of course in standard definition, you know, you'd powder. When I went in to do Live with Regis and Kelly, they had made the transition to HD shooting and HD cameras. They used an airbrush to paint the makeup on your face because you see, if it's powder, you see it. You see every kernel and grain of the powder, and you look crazy. But the airbrush, they're actually painting your face, and it looks realistic. We don't wear makeup here, and one of the reasons is we shoot in HD. We only deliver in 720p, but at the same time, it's high enough. It's certainly much higher quality than the screensavers was. So there's no way I'm going to put makeup on. I'm just, you know, if I'm shiny, I'm shiny, because we cannot do it well enough to make it look normal on HD.
Yeah, I think when you brought up the idea of the television work, we've had visual effects in television for many years. I mean, the Star Trek TV series back in the 60s had visual effects of that era.
Not such great ones.
Not great. It was done on a shoestring budget in comparison. But if we look at current films like Game of Thrones, those dragons.
That's amazing.
Amazing work. It's feature level.
Do they take a year to do it?
They don't have the luxury of time, but they do more quantity of shots probably in a tighter schedule. A lot of the work is done at a very high standard, and a number of the supervisors also come from film and have gone to television.
But as far as I know, it's almost entirely shot on location, so that helps with it, right? Because then they don't have to fake a castle or whatever.
But they do a lot of scene extension. So there is, not everything is a location.
They paint it out around the edges.
Or if they have to make a scene with a large army, anything that looks like there's a huge...
I'm not going to say anything, but last night's episode... There must have been some CGI in that one. No spoilers, but there must have been some CGI in that. A lot of CGI. And they don't have the time. They have the budget, I think. I mean,
the budgets have increased.
Yeah.
And of course, when we talked about resolution, nowadays with HD, they can't get away with, they can't fake the standard definition. Oh, no one's going to see that. They're going to see it.
Is there some nervousness about going to 4K television because of that?
I'm sure there is, but we're already in feature doing that.
4K is a standard in movies.
It's a standard in movies, and I know that for IMAX, in some cases, they're rendering much higher than 4K.
Wow.
I mean, IMAX is about 5.4, but I've heard about resolutions rendering to 8K to some degree.
Is it all still digital? Is it all digital in IMAX? See, there's some people still shooting IMAX film, right?
I mean, there are filmmakers that are actually. Nolan's a huge fan of it.
He makes IMAX.
So he shoots a lot of his stuff.
That's only because he's so big now that he can afford all that film stock, because it must cost millions for film stock alone. Not to mention developing and printing.
The cameras are cumbersome. They're very large.
You got to check the gate. there's no gate on a digital camera.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no question that as far as choosing a high resolution format, people are. But to be perfectly honest, I think people were happy with film when it was out. I don't think there was.
You think of a Humphrey Bogart classic, black and white, 24 frames a second. They look great.
Yeah. And there are many filmmakers that don't agree with the high frame rate.
Yeah.
A number of them don't agree with 3D. And they're not shooting in 3D. But then an obvious example would be James Cameron, who is a huge advocate of 3D.
He is the high frame rate guy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So isn't that interesting? What do you think customers want, the viewers want?
You know, it's going to be funny to say this, but I think the customers don't really.
They don't know.
Well, I think they're really not huge fans of high frame rate.
Oh.
I also think they're not huge fans of 3D.
We did reject 3D, I think, pretty thoroughly.
I think that's two reasons. I think the fact that there's a ticket tier price, it's higher to watch a 3D film.
Yeah.
But I think some films are shot natively for 3D, and there's a strong case for it. I think almost every year we have one or two movies that make sense to see in 3D. Life of Pi, Avatar, Gravity. Those films
I agree.
took
Those are the
advantage
ones-
of the
yeah.
3Ds. But most of these movies, a lot of them are shot in 2D, and they're just done as a post-process conversion to take advantage of it, and there really isn't a huge. But I think Mad Max in 3D is actually worth watching. This new Fury
I'll
Road.
really go see it in 3D?
Yeah.
Because I hate 3D.
But I can understand. Some people also physically can't see 3D.
Yeah, I have some of that problem, but I can, if I concentrate, I can see with two eyes. I only usually use one eye. Let's talk about Star Wars, the Despecialized Edition. How do you feel about first of all, and you were part of the
Yeah, I was part of the. Well, part of the
Wait a
problem.
minute. Let's show this. This is on YouTube. So in the original, this is the scene in the Mos Eisley spaceport, and the original scene was shot all with models, and there was no creature walking in the background
There was
there.
no computer graphics. Yeah.
That was now. So George wanted to add that. He's famous for saying this: the Star Wars I shot in 1977 wasn't the Star Wars I wanted to do, but I just didn't have the capability or the money to do it the way I wanted to do it. So he says all I'm doing is making it like I wanted it originally.
You know, every filmmaking process is a compromise.
Yeah.
To some degree. I mean, there is always a limitation in time and budget to make a film.
Right.
And this is true for live action. This is also true for animated feature films.
And it's his film, so he has the right as the director to change it. But then, and I've been thinking about this. I realize part of the reason this is an issue with Star Wars particularly, besides the fact that George has probably altered it more than any other director's ever altered any of his stuff, although there were quite a few Blade Runner versions. I think Ridley Scott messed with that a lot, partly because he felt like the studio changed
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't like the cut the studio
Right.
forced on the theatrical release.
But I think as far as special effects, this is the poster child, is Episode 4.
Well, you know, I don't want to sound defensive or apologetic, but I think part of it is George is a filmmaker. He also, at the time, owned a visual effects company.
Right.
So he had the opportunity to make the changes that he thought somehow enhanced the film. But to be fair, also to show that I'm neutral on this subject, I also worked on E.T.
Did you?
And I worked on a specialized version that was, I think, the 25th anniversary of that. And Spielberg.
There you go.
Removed,
Jabba the.
yeah.
Okay, this is a really, really good example.
Yeah.
Jabba the Hutt. The original version. There's no.
There's a guy with a fur.
There's a guy with fur on.
And that was Jabba as it was envisioned in the original film.
Yeah. So I would think about why people didn't like it and why the Despecialized Edition exists. It's because people saw it as kids.
Sure.
And to them, this is a childhood memory.
Sure.
And they remember the guy in furs, and they don't like their childhood memories messed with. And so they want a version of the film that was the way they remembered it.
Okay.
Not that it's the best version, but
Sure. And I totally agree in a sense that people they personalize their film the film experience because it is their childhood. It is their memory. And in the case of what you just mentioned, honestly, there was no Jabba reference in the original Star Wars.
Right.
That was a cut sequence that was removed from the film. The public never saw it, except they saw the CG version that was added in the 90s. But
so they don't remember a guy in fur because it never happened.
It was just something that was trimmed from the actual editing floor.
See, I was an adult when I saw it. I have no memory of Star Wars, the original Star Wars.
But the point I make is I was referencing E.T. only for a reason that Spielberg removed references to guns.
That's right.
And some
when
people,
when the feds are coming to get them in that they had guns in the original.
And he removed the guns, and there was a backlash, just like George had, and he has since made it public that he made a mistake, and that I should have left the film alone. And we did have a CG ET that was added that enhanced the shot.
ET was a puppet.
E.T. in the original film was a puppet.
Yeah.
There was a computer-generated E.T. that was made for the special edition. Again, the argument is leave a film alone. Like I would say that look at James Cameron. He's adopted CGI in a lot of his films, especially the recent Avatar films. Sorry, somehow left the phone.
Well, I think of Ted Turner's decision to colorize those great black and white movies.
Yeah.
And of course that was sacrilege because it wasn't the original director and it wasn't the original vision. Maybe they shot in black and white because that's all they had, but maybe they shot in black and white or did what they did because that was the medium. And it's crazy to colorize those old movies.
Yeah, so
this isn't as bad as that.
I think like some of the shots that were added, John No worked on some of them. I remember they just added more X-wings. They made it look like it was more larger. But the argument could be made that film should be left as it was.
Well, what I'd love to see, and maybe George will do this, is release of a Blu-ray of the original untouched. I don't know if pristine prints even exist anymore. They're all pretty beat up. But if he had a pristine print, release a Blu-ray of the original, just as is. I bought the digital set. I bought all 6 on digital, which is probably the Blu-ray version, right, I would guess.
There was a DVD release that did exactly what you said. It wasn't anamorphic. I don't want to get too technical, but it was the original film. And it was actually from the source, the Laserdisc edition.
I had the laser of Star
The Laserdisc, original Laserdisc edition, the box set, was unmodified. But if you really want to get precise, he's modified the film many times.
Right.
It adjusted the sound.
Yeah.
Originally, it wasn't called A New Hope. It was a Star Wars.
Right. Because there wasn't, you know.
And then
but it was Episode 4, which I thought was very cool. When they did that crawl, Episode 4, what is he talking about? What? But that was good for a fan. That was like, oh, maybe there's going to be some more. Or a prequel or whatever. It was smart of him to do that. What about Han shot first, though?
That's an edit, and that was a choice that, in fact, it's a funny question because George himself made that choice to have...
Han has to shoot first.
He should, and he changed the character. Right. I don't know does that represent something that he felt wrong about, but he even had a T-shirt where he wore publicly that said Han shot first. So I mean,
that's confusing.
It's a confusing point.
That's confusing.
He made the changes, and then but maybe he was reacting.
George is a human being. He's gone through stages. At first, he didn't want fan fiction, fan films. Mm-hmm. Then he realized, well, wait a minute, this is great. Hey, I've done the same thing. You know, as time, you go back and forth sometimes on this.
Sure.
And because it's a passion. It's something you care a lot. This is your baby. Here's the Mos Eisley scene. Mm-hmm. The other problem is that the special effects when this was done in the 90s weren't that good. So they don't really look great. Mm-hmm. But if you say that, then the implication is, well, they should go back and do it again. And again, and again, and again, every 10 years.
We could even talk about the film that followed this film, which is Empire Strikes Back. And one of the signature effects shot of that period was the Tauntauns.
Right.
And that was a stop motion process that Phil Tippett did.
Right.
There's no motion blur. It kind of stands out.
Yeah. You could tell. Frankly, you could tell it was stop motion.
It was stop motion,
Yeah.
and technically today we could do a post blur.
Here's that animal. It's gonna. Well, I guess they took it out.
But
that's the despecialized version.
Yeah. So I could understand that, but the argument could be, hey, that was what we could do with stop motion.
Well, that I can kind of understand because you can see the Tauntauns going. So adding a motion blur to smooth that out, I can understand that.
But that wasn't done. I mean, so the point is the technology is here right now for us to change it. But then the argument is, the Bruce shark in Jaws looks fake.
Right.
Well, how are we going to address that? Well, actually, what Steven Spielberg did during that time was he actually added more dialogue and he had more character sequences
to cover
for the limitations of the effects. So the movie's a better movie.
Yes.
And that he's publicly said that if he could use computer graphics now, that
it wouldn't be as good.
Yeah. wouldn't be as good. So the argument is, some could argue that effects could be a limitation to the movie. I mean, I think the right balance is the effects helps the filmmaker develop the film, and it carries the story, but it isn't a crutch to completely lean on in replacement of character development.
And I think that's where 3D failed, because people became enamored of the effect and were not paying attention to the movie as much. They started doing things in a movie because it was 3D.
And this is the old argument, because pre-digital we had the much more primitive 3D,
right?
And it was the same. It was a spectacle thing. It was done in the 50s.
House of Wax.
And a Jaws 3D. It was not
right.
There weren't better movies because of the 3D, but they thought that would bring people into.
Filmmakers are human, and they get new toys. They want to play with them. I don't blame them.
Yes, that's absolutely the case, and I think filmmakers can get enamored with computer-generated effects, and that's why we see so much of that.
Right.
But I see the backlash too. I mean, I know that we have filmmakers that like the practical, like Nolan, and we also have the audience that
doesn't know the difference, or does sometimes.
I think they do. There is a group of people out there that have been very vocal that prefer makeup, but the reality is, I have to be honest, the marketplace hasn't shown that.
Right.
So
maybe with 3D it did.
Yeah, the marketplace.
I think it voted.
Yeah,
they voted with their feet. But we love IMAX, and frankly, we love IMAX 3D for the right movie. Right? That's an amazing experience. So it's not that we want to throw it out. It's, as you said, there's certain movies you want to see. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about Uncanny Valley. But first off, I want to talk about shopping. Do you get a chill, like a cold chill? I say shopping, clothes shopping. Ugh, I do. It's the worst thing in the world. That's why I was so thrilled to find out about Trunk Club. Holy cow. A free service. This is pretty amazing. You get a personal stylist. We'll talk with you. We'll determine what you're looking for, what your style is, what clothes you like, what you don't like. Of course, your sizes, your color preferences, all of that. And then we'll help you get exactly what you want. And the reason I say it's a free service is because it's not a subscription. It costs you nothing. You only pay for the clothes you keep. This is so amazing. So here's how it works. I called Robin. Actually, she called me, my personal stylist. I went through. I said, I'm kind of chunky. I explained my sizes. I said, I'm a preppy by kind of tradition, but I'd like to be a little bit more styling. And she said, okay, let me send you some stuff. So then, actually, the first thing she does is create a website where you say hot or not. You vote on that. And then she sends you a trunk. This is the trunk. They're different sizes depending on how many clothes you're going to get. And I have to say, it's really fun. This is not shopping. This is at your house. You got 10 days to look at everything in the trunk. They're really nicely made clothes. This Billy Reed shirt, I love this. I think these are all ones we kept. I'm going gingham, man. I'm now a lumberjack. I love this unstructured jacket. I have no idea what unstructured means, but Lisa says this is an unstructured jacket. So you look at it and you say, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this. Whatever you don't want, you put in the box, and you pay nothing for shipping, nothing for handling, nothing for the stylist. You only pay for the clothes you keep. I love this cable knit. I told Robin I love sweaters, and she sent me a lot of sweaters. I also told her I wear bow ties. She sent me the prettiest bow tie, which I think I left at home. Neckties, shoes, anything that you wear, you can get in a trunk. So here's the deal. Go to trunkclub.com/twit and try it. It'll cost you nothing. If you don't like the clothes you get, you send it back. No harm, no foul. Oh, I really like this. This is the other thing is, while I hate to shop, it's kind of fun to try new textures. This is John Varvatos, no wonder. New textures, new fabrics, and maybe, get your style up a little bit. I've gotten shoes, I've gotten ties, shirts, sweaters, trunk pants, of course, suits, whatever. They tour the country with tailors to measure you. If you want custom stuff, they can do that too. Trunkclub.com/twit. This is your chance. Guys, you don't have to shop to start looking sharp. And I tell you what, it's a great way to impress. For the job you want, the partner you want, trunkclub.com/twit. Not a subscription. They won't send you a box until you say, "Yeah, I want a box." When you get your first box, you go through it. When you don't, that's it. And if you want another box, you call your stylist, say, "Okay, I'm ready," or you email her, "I'm ready. I want another box. I want to really focus on sweaters this time." She'll take care of it for you. Trunkclub.com/twit. I always wanted a personal stylist. I just didn't know it. We're talking with Stewart Lew. He's a digital, okay, I'm going to get this right, a digital model supervisor, a visual effects supervisor, and person. You make visual effects. Actually, do you have his reel? Because we could show some of the stuff he's done. Former chairman of the Visual Effects Society in the Bay Area. He's now on the board. Still working, right?
Yeah.
Are you working on a movie right now?
Well, I'm not. I'm actually doing a lot of education in terms
Good.
of training
Good.
future.
What movie is this?
This is The Mummy.
Oh, that had
That's
some
Star
great
Trek
effects.
Generations.
Yeah.
Enterprise B.
So all of those, that plasma storm, that's
Yeah.
you, huh?
I did most of the models, the CG ships. These
Cool.
are it's the special edition in Star Wars.
Yep. Love it.
And
How long does that take a shot? A few seconds like that.
it varies from the model building process. It varies in terms of the complexity of the models. Some of this has miniatures, some of this is CG.
Do you do some miniatures too? Any more?
Not. I'm mostly a digital artist in terms of my experience set, but and this is for Forrest Gump.
Oh, look at that. Forrest Gump was a great example of a movie that really worked, but had to have special effects because he had to be in all these places.
This is a Perfect Storm.
Oh, that was a
we
great
had-
movie.
Ships and helicopters.
Was there a
the
tank?
water.
Was there a real
There
tank?
was.
Yeah.
And it was in Warner Brothers. They did.
Water's hard to do, isn't it?
It is. Some of the hardest films are films that involve water.
Because water at scale looks different than water in a miniature. And I don't know how you fix that problem. Oh no.
It's Racer.
Oh, this is
It
fun.
was for Return of the Jedi.
I love
Mars
special
Attacks.
effects. Oh, that's
that
fun.
was Tim Burton.
Yeah, he must be fun to work with.
Yeah, he was. I think that was. This is The Mask.
This is a good example of how the special effects need to work with live action. Particularly challenging, right? How do the actors feel about that kind of thing? Because they can't see what's going to happen.
I think it depends. I know that Natalie Portman has made it public that it was really hard for her.
Yeah.
I think doing the Star Wars prequels because she was, I think, 16 at the time and
Right.
just standing in front of a green screen. And
How about Jim Carrey? Did he like being in them? Was that because a lot of the effects were based on his kind of expressiveness, but they were special effects.
he had a
Or
good
visual
time.
effects.
We were inspired a lot by Tex Avery.
Oh yeah, the
And,
cartoons.
Yeah, so we did a lot of research. I think this is true of any artist and animator that works in the business. There's a lot of reference. There's a lot of research that's done. A Disney animator would say the same thing. So in terms of visual effects, this is for Perfect. This is for Twister.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
that was actually a sequence that the tractor part was that actually got the show before the script was even done.
You did that special effects sequence first.
We did a sequence to sell on the possibility of doing digital tornadoes and
Wow. See how cool this will look.
yeah. And at the time, I think it was Kathleen Kennedy, and it was Steven Spielberg as a producer, Jan de Bont as the director. This is for a Budweiser commercial. What's up?
Commercials now have a lot of special effects.
Yes, there's a lot of there's. I think when we think about
I know.
so when we think about that's why as in the VS we definitely want to reach out to artists that work in commercials, video games, new media.
Where should they write? Where should they email?
Well, they should definitely look in the Visual Effects Society website.
Okay.
And the minimal requirement is 5 years of production experience. And I want to be clear that it isn't 100% artists. We have engineers that work in the industry. We have producers. So the term that we typically say in the VS is practitioners of visual effects. But Ed Catmull, who is a co-founder of the VS, the Visual Effects Society, is the president of Pixar and Disney.
And I love this pin, and I couldn't figure it out until I went to the Visual Effects Society website. You're wearing the pin. The very first special effect was
That's right.
George Méliès.
That's right.
The moon. He was
Journey to the Moon.
Journey to the Moon, and it's pretty obviously
Yeah.
a special effect,
That's
but
right.
it's still really this first special
yeah.
effect, isn't it?
And if you look at the Scorsese film Hugo,
Right.
it pretty much dramatizes the whole craft where visual
Melius
effects
is in it,
started
yeah.
as a magician and
Yeah.
made magic or made the illusion into film.
That was in The Silence. I mean, that's how long ago. Yeah, Hugo was
Yeah.
was obviously Scorsese's tribute to, in fact, all of that, all of the special
I
effects.
think it was
in the
also
earliest
his
days.
first digital movie and his
Oh,
first
interesting.
3D film.
It was 3D, that's right.
So that's another example, I think, where it's not to say that 3D is all bad. There can be a case-by-case situation
Right.
where 3D makes sense.
Right. VisualEffectsSociety.com. One of the things I do notice is that nobody's trying to do, I mean, there was Polar Express, but people do not try to do human beings. And it's because of this thing called the uncanny valley. We're very adept. Our brain is so well tuned to recognizing
That's right.
normal humans. I think it has to do, my ill-informed opinion is it has to do with the importance evolutionarily of recognizing diseased people or people who could be a threat to you versus normal. And so our brains are well tuned, and so we get kind of disgusted or creeped out by something that it looks to be human but is oddly different. And I think that's really an evolutionary effect to protect you against illness. This is a Polar Express, and
Which I had nothing to do with. But I mean, no, I'm not being dismissive, but that is, the director of Polar Express, to be honest.
they used face cameras and all sorts of
They
stuff.
used
to
motion
generate-
capture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was one of the first 3D films. I mean, it was projected in 3D, but that was Robert Zemeckis, and Robert Zemeckis, for about 10 years, made these performance capture digital films.
Oh, interesting.
And if you
After
know,
Back to the Future, that's
yeah,
what.
exactly. So just to have context to the audience, Zemeckis made the Back to the Future films. He did Forrest Gump. He did Contact. He's done
Great movies.
a wide
Brilliant
range
movies.
of movies. The last film he did that was out was Flight, which was a kind of return to form. But for 10 years, he experimented with making these digital films, and he was interested in realistic humans. But they don't quite work. And
He
I
never solved it, did he? How do you solve it? Do you know?
I think the technology has advanced, but I think that there's a reality that we, the public, the audience, even not people who work in visual effects or filmmakers, know what a person looks like.
Right.
And creating that in a digital format is really, really
But
difficult.
we know what a dog looks like, too. And you can still make a dog that's like that Martian dog that's realistic. It's really interesting. Pixar, of course, avoided this. And they used
didn't
toys.
You're right. But before they did Toy Story, they did a film called Tin Toy. That
Tin
had
Toy, yeah.
that had a little baby infant,
Yeah.
and it had the Uncanny Valley problem
Yep.
way before Polar Express. And they realized we don't want to
Can't
go.
do it. So is there going to be a time when visual effects are good enough that they can fool humans? That we can make a human that looks like a human?
I think yes. But to be fair, you brought a very good point. But instead of using Polar Express as an example, we should probably use the latest Fast and Furious movie.
No, that doesn't have fake humans
Yes,
in it.
it has.
Oh, stop it.
Paul Walker.
Well, they had to.
Paul
He
Walker
died.
died during the production.
So you're saying
there-
that later in the
Yeah.
movie he's not real?
Yes, the beach sequence in the end is a digital
But you
double.
stay at a distance.
It's at a distance, but we do see him also driving in the towards
I
the end of the
didn't
film,
know that.
and that was Weta Digital.
I didn't
and
know
you know,
that. So they are getting there.
They're getting there, but some people who look for it will say,
That's obvious.
That's obvious.
Yeah.
But if you don't look for it, a lot of people, I would say the mainstream of the audience doesn't really
Right.
pay enough attention to say, hey, that's not Paul Walker.
And that's a case where they wouldn't have made that choice. They had to make that choice. It wasn't something you would, voluntarily choose to do, but you had to finish the film.
And there could be an argument, maybe if you wanted, for whatever reason, to resurrect a person who isn't alive now,
Right.
and you wanted, I think the Billboard Awards last year had a synthetic Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
And that he did a performance of an unreleased unreleased song that he never performed live.
Wow.
That was recorded.
But don't they do things like they make it look like he's a ghost, or they?
I think in that case
I didn't see it. So
it was done to look realistic, and it was an example. I think we're getting there, but the argument could be, or the debate could be: is it necessary? Do we need to see Elvis? Do we need to see a Bruce Lee and have a digital version of these characters in the film. I think the Paul Walker case is obvious just simply because the person died during production, and they decided to honor his memory, but to have him as a digital double.
Yeah, and people knew that he'd passed. I mean, anybody who's a Fast and Furious fan.
I think you're right about the point about animals, because we at ILM many years back we did a 101 Dalmatians, and the dogs were digital. There were some real dogs, but you can't really direct animals
Right.
the way you can direct people. So there was use of digital animals. I think the public is a lot more attentive when they see real people. And some examples that you bring up, besides Polar Express, I would also mention like the last Tron had issues with a youthful Jeff Bridges. He didn't look totally like Jeff Bridges. He looked like a synthetic face.
So is this a Michael Jackson impersonator, the Billboard Award, or is that a computer generated?
The computer generated.
It kind of, yeah, that's got a little halo around it.
But it is.
But you're saying he never danced this dance.
No.
This isn't from some film somewhere.
This is completely, yes, this is completely made for this production. And this is actually done here in Marin County.
It's the hands and face, isn't it? The body is not an issue. It's always the hands and the face.
Well, there's a lot of subtleties in the face in terms of muscles.
Right.
We call it facial action coding system, FACS. But I think that the last two Planet of the Apes films,
Really amazing.
all of those apes were digital creations.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the past of the original Apes films, they're all makeup effects.
Right.
So I don't
You can tell it's a person in a
Yeah.
mask.
And some of the Apes sequels were done at a lower budget, and the
Right.
quality
They're
of
getting
them,
maskier and maskier.
the characters in
But the rise
distance.
of the Planet of the Apes, and of course, it's partly because you have this incredible actor wearing a camera that is mapping his face, and
But there's an army of artists that have to help develop that physical reality for the digital characters.
Right.
And Weta Digital was involved with those two Apes films, and
they
Caesar,
are amazing.
yeah,
Caesar's incredible.
Caesar's incredible. I
Yeah.
mean, it is Andy Serkis, but
I mean, he's incredible, but it's the two together, right?
I think it's the two together, and we can't deny it. I mean, that's why.
I wanted Andy to win an Academy Award because I feel like that's a performance. I know that the Academy apparently thinks that's not a performance.
Well, there is a reality too. Here's the difference that actors are very attentive to. When somebody puts makeup on an actor, they know that's just themselves.
Right.
But when you're doing a digital performance like what Andy has done in The Planet of the Apes, there is also a certain
There's
amount
a
of
lot of
animation.
computer stuff
There's a
going
lot
on,
of
yeah.
artists behind that. So it's not
Yeah.
100% the actor. So there are people who embrace it like Andy, and then there are people who oppose it, and some
Right.
actors who feel like that's not 100% me. And even there is a reality because you have to have a crew of artists that create these characters, and
Right.
so it isn't really 100% Andy Serkis. There is a combination of Andy and a brilliant crew of artists and engineers that make that possible.
I have to say, I'm watching this Michael Jackson video, and I was sure at the time that this was I knew he wasn't on stage, obviously, but they had some video somewhere. You're saying that's an animated character doing that dance. Okay, so the uncanny valley will be solved because at no point do you really feel like, oh, I just thought, oh, this is old video that they somehow.
No.
Wow. I guess we're making some progress.
So it's the progress is being made. So that maybe Polar Express isn't the best example.
No, it's old.
It's like
old.
it's like how when we were mentioning last Starfighter, or looking at any movies that sound they stand out.
This is last year, so presumably we're even better now. Wow, it's fun.
So we typically say in the industry the bar is always being raised.
Yeah.
So whatever was like impossible last year,
Right.
we'll try to make it possible this year.
And this is testament to the fact that the audience felt like they had watched a Michael Jackson performance. I mean, they're on their feet, they're dancing, they're excited about it. Of course, there's other dancers, there's real music, but I didn't see a lot of people going, ooh, that's uncanny.
So, I mean, there is aspects of it, but you're right. Generally, I think the animated features in studios like Pixar, Disney, and Blue Sky, they have avoided realistic humans. But I have to be honest, Andy, the character in Toy Story, in the last Toy Story, Toy Story 3, was the most realistic human I think Pixar ever made. So if you compare what they did in the first film 20 years ago and what they just did in more recent films like Toy Story 3. Yes,
watch.
there's been progress. There's a different look. Of course, the character has aged too. He's a college student.
Right.
He's not a little boy.
Don't talk about this last one. It made me cry, and I don't want to remember the sad. It was so sad because my kids went off to college right about that same time. Hey, it's great, Stewart Lew. It's great to talk to you. The Visual Effects Society is at visualeffectssociety.com. They have lots of events, screenings, get-togethers.
We've had drone cinematography. We've had retrospective screenings with filmmakers that have worked in the past, like Wrath of Khan, Jurassic Park, the original Star Wars movies.
Can I join as like an adjunct member just to go to some of these events? I'd really like to.
We do bring in guests, but definitely the screenings are specifically aimed. The organization is aimed at professionals.
Yeah. If you're a professional in the business, visualeffectssociety.com, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, of course, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, New York, London, Australia, and New Zealand, and they have events all over the world and a lot of interesting stuff. And Stewart, I'm so glad you could come by. And I love the logo with the rocket in the eye of the moon. That is just great. Thank you, Stewart, for joining us.
Thank you.
You can find him on Twitter. He says, oh, it's so industry heavy. That's probably why you would want to follow him at Stewart, STEWARTLEW. And thank you all for being here for Triangulation. We do this show each and every Monday around about 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1800 UTC if you want to watch live. Love it if you do. The chat room's very helpful. They ask questions and I just steal them. If you can't watch live, all our shows are always available on demand. And I know for most of you, that's the most convenient way to watch. That's fine with me. You can download audio and video at twit.tv/for this show, TRI. But also on YouTube, on iTunes, anywhere you get your shows, you can get audio and video. And also those great apps. Our independent third-party developers have made great apps for us. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Stewart. We'll see you next time on Triangulation. Bye-bye.